Welcome to the show, Matt. Today we're diving into the future of revenue leadership, how to build a predictable engine for growth. We'll start by exploring your core philosophy of moving from hustle to engine, then move into the high stakes challenge of aligning sales and marketing. And finally, we'll discuss the future of the fractional CRO model. Matt, you're the founder of Fractional CRO. Please tell us how you got started.
Yeah. Well, first off, thanks for having me, Ruben. Nice to meet with you and look forward to the discussion today. So yeah, I am the founder of Fractional CRO. I started about 3 years ago and really decided to start the company. I looked at a couple of different options of kind of how I could bring my experience from the corporate world and really focus on working with SMEs. I did a lot of sales, individual contributor roles, a lot of marketing, individual contributor roles, and then also led sales and marketing in large global organizations and felt like the CRO role, started to see that alignment between sales and marketing was so critical. I mean, after talking to founders, just through my network, I realized that this was a big gap in small and medium sized businesses and really what was holding them back from, just kind of hustling and working their tails off to actually growing and scaling properly. Felt like CRO was really the right avenue and really a gap in this market. So I started Fractional CRO, like I said, 3 years ago and have really loved it ever since.
It's amazing, Matt. Let's talk about your core philosophy. Can you explain the hustle to engine concept and what is the single biggest, sorry, what is the single biggest operational sign that a founder-led business has hit that growth plateau and needs to transition to a structured engine?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think everybody hits it at different times, at different stages, right? So there's not really one size fits all, but I think the core of what I continuously see and is kind of a really good indicator of, hey, it's time to start to think a little bit differently about how you run your business is when you look at really the sales pipeline and what have you been bringing into the business and servicing whatever you sell, if it's a service, if you sell an actual product, but you've tapped into your network, right, as a founder. So typically founders are well networked or have a network that they're growing and they kind of, a lot of their first times of business, or first signs of business come from that network of people that they know or people of people that they know, right? So once you get to that point where you really have tapped that network out and you're reacting to that demand, there comes a really an inflection point, Ruben, where you have to start creating demand. And that I think is the biggest indicator of, okay, hey, we've serviced, we've done all the work we can with the business that's coming into us from the network, from known people or known entities. Now we need to go out and explore and find new people to sell to or new markets to explore. And that's really the inflection point where typically like a CRO or really at a basis, just process needs to come in place and replace some of that hustle.
Great, Matt. Thank you so much. That is a very powerful framework. You mentioned that the biggest shift is changing the mindset that marketing is just about making things look pretty to actually connecting it to direct revenue. What is the single biggest operational bottleneck you face when you're trying to unify a client's fragmented marketing and sales data and also processes into one cohesive system?
Yeah, I think there's not really one moment or one thing. I think it's a combination. So I think historically, right, if you look at marketing in general, marketing's always in a lot of organizations, no matter what industry, has always kind of come across as a support function, right? And I've sat in marketing teams, I've sat in marketing leadership roles, leading teams, global teams, and it constantly comes up, no matter how big or small the organization you're in is a lot of times the leadership or the business in general sees marketing as a support function. And it's not until you make that mental shift that actually marketing should be at the seat of the revenue table. And actually everything you do from a marketing perspective should be driving pipeline and sales momentum. That's when the businesses really shift in the proper way. And that comes down to mindset. But I think there's also some tools and frameworks that you can think through and start to align sales and marketing. One of the things that I typically do when I look at a new engagement with a client is really what is your go-to-market messaging or go-to-market framework. So what is it that you stand for? What is it that, starts to differentiate you from this? And I know I probably mentioned to you, like this sea of sameness, I call it. So everybody in every industry all kind of sounds the same, looks the same. I mean, the industries that I've been in, I've grown up really in the professional services space. I mean, there's been multiple times where I've presented to like a CEO or, a leader and said, hey, here's what everybody's saying out there online. And literally it all looked the same. It all sounded the same. Color, skin, everything was the same. And so there's a huge opportunity in these industries that we work in to just do something slightly different or position yourself slightly more human or genuine, whatever that is that makes people remember you over others. So I think nailing down what that go to market is, typically the best go to market messages come from your existing clients, right? Or the people you're working with. And a lot of times organizations aren't either comfortable or they just don't go out and ask those questions of like, hey, why did you work with us? Why do you continue to work with us? What sets us apart from others that do exactly what we do? And taking those words from the customers themselves and flipping that into how you go to market. Because at the end of the day, you want to create engagements and conversations with people just like the customers you have typically, right? So why not use their language to attract more of them, right? So it's pretty, I mean, when you lay it out like that, it's very simple, but it's a very critical piece that a lot of founders and businesses just don't take. So nailing that down. And then I think there's one thing to have it on a piece of paper and everybody agrees on it. There's a whole nother thing to then drive consistency around it, right? Because if you go out, and this is where marketing and sales alignment is really critical, and this is why this framework is really critical, is if marketing and sales co-builds that together and is aligned that, okay, hey, this does differentiate us. We can pitch this as a differentiator. We can win new business. And marketing thinks that, hey, we can position ourselves this way and really drive engagement and funnel from this messaging. Now it needs to be consistently out there, online and offline channels, your social media, your website, all the way down to your pitch deck. And then even after you bring on a new customer in your customer success and operation side of the business, it has to feel and act and sound like the same brand. Because if it doesn't, or it breaks down along that customer journey, then the customer's not going to trust it or they're not going to remember it, right? So that framework typically is really like I call it like the nucleus of your go to market approach. And like if you can nail that down and really build that out from sales and marketing, then you start to align marketing and sales because they're all working towards one hymn sheet basically on how they go and what they say to prospects and customers.
That's amazing, Matt. How would you know if there is a breakdown in the company wording at any point in the sales process?
I think, I mean, there's a couple, you could look at, you look at just kind of the traffic that's maybe being driven to your different sites or social or whatever other online channels you have, right? Are you seeing like a big organic push? Are you bringing in leads and meetings booked and stuff from your online sources? I mean, that I think is a pretty good indicator. If it's not landing, something's wrong. I think, you can go in and do like almost self audits with the customer base and asking them, hey, this is some of the stuff that we're pushing out there, out in the market. Does this align to kind of the feeling that you have with us as a company? You can kind of do those self audits. Those also are good indicators of like, yeah, maybe this messaging, we built it in like this vacuum and we haven't really talked to the market, so it doesn't land. But typically, I mean, you can see very clearly if you start laying out your pipeline and really all the conversion points, if it's top of funnel, like brand awareness, whatever channels online and offline you're at, and ultimately getting to the point of some type of engagement by those contacts. If there's a big gap there and people just aren't converting, you're popping in thousands and thousands of people are seeing your brand, but nobody's taking that next step in your funnel, then there's probably something with the messaging that you need to relook at.
I see. That's fair. You mentioned the importance of a consistent narrative from initial engagement to all the way to customer success, right? What is the real quantifiable cost to a business when their marketing message is disconnected?
I don't know. I mean, it's the cost could be tremendous, right? You could lose so much opportunity or distrust. And I would say that's just with the people that are engaging with your brand in whatever fashion they are. But what I think the bigger cost lost is the actual repeatable or like, referral business that can come from that, right? So if people aren't connected to your brand, they're not going to talk about your brand, right? And they're not going to talk about your company or your service that you offer, your product that you offer. So to me, I think that's the real loss is that you basically, first impressions matter, right? We talk about that all the time in business. Like if they're not getting a good first impression or something's off, they're not going to go and talk about it, right? But if we've all been there, like at a networking event or a dinner party, and you've met somebody, really good first impression, really engaging, and they came across authentic, you're probably going to talk to like then hang out with some other buddies. Hey, I met this guy or girl and they were really cool and really cool story and it was really interesting. Like we need to get together. You need to meet them. That's exactly what happens in the business world, right? Like if they don't have that connection, that genuine connection with your company and trust, you do what you say you do, they're not going to go out and talk about it. And that's a huge opportunity loss if you don't have that people talking about it, especially in the age that we're in now where there's a lot of new entrants in every single market. And so the ones that are really going to grow and scale are the ones that people trust, believe in, that come across genuine, and that they let their prospects and customers do a lot of the marketing and sales for them.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that is free marketing and probably the most powerful word of mouth, right?
For sure. I mean, think of any service or offering you bought, right? Typically, you go out and you ask people, "Hey, what was your experience here?" Or this or that. Like those are the ones that you're going to probably make that purchase or go with that company, right? Versus somebody you had just found online through a Google search.
Absolutely. Yeah. Matt, you're scaling your business by building a bench of fractional talent in different industries, so healthcare, services, etc. What is the what is the single biggest internal operational bottleneck you face when trying to scale this model?
I think the model is pretty straightforward. It's I've tried to make it as simple for myself, for the fractional CROs coming under fractional CRO, but also for the customer, for the end client, because they're the most important, right? I think the biggest bottleneck is a matter of just having enough time in the day. And I think that's probably what every founder sees, right? Is growing that part of the business and bringing on the right people to represent the brand to the end customer, and then being able to also grow and evolve and build the business while also managing your own book of business, right? That's the biggest thing, is just everything takes time. And there's only so many hours in the day, right? So I think that's probably the biggest bottleneck. I think one thing that I learned early on is there's a lot of executives or leaders that want to now, because fractional just in general is a it's kind of a buzz term and buzzword, and people are thinking about it and looking at it as a career opportunity. There's a lot of people out there that want to do it. I think to me, what was really important is I could just go out and identify, a bunch of people that reach out to me and put them on my bench. But to me, I really wanted it to be a very curated bench that aligned to my values and what I believe is the true value that a fractional CRO can bring to customers. So I wanted to align with people that felt and approach business and engagements the same exact way versus just bringing on a bunch of fractional CROs because that's, one way of growing my business. I'd rather have less really authentic, genuine executives on the bench working with customers underneath my brand fractional CRO versus just a volume game. That makes sense.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That does make sense. And Matt, do you think that it also helps with maintaining quality control and standardization?
Yeah, I definitely think it does. It does help from a quality control perspective. Yeah.
Amazing. Great. So you bridge the gap between strategy and execution, often rolling up your sleeves to build automation in HubSpot or write content as well. What is the single biggest challenge you face in getting client teams to adopt and sustain the new process and technology that you implement even after you've built the engine for them?
Yeah, I think it's just like anything. It's it's change management, right? Something new is always hard to for people to adopt, especially if they've been doing something the old way, right? So a lot of the clients I've had recently, coming off of Google Sheets and Excels and getting them to use a CRM. I mean, it's a constant education, constant change management. But it's not until they start to see the value, right? And actually some of it is, you realize it typically around this time of year when you can go back and report on your previous year and business development, marketing, sales, marketing activities. You're only able to do that when you have it in a CRM and you're tracking all of that properly, right? If you're just working off of Google Sheets and Excel sheets, you're not. When you sit down for your planning and you're like recap of the last year and you're planning for the new year, you're just basing it off of assumptions and gut feelings, which I know, in some businesses at some levels, that's all you have to go from, and that's fine. But the businesses that I've been working with that are more established, have been there for a while. You have to make that shift of gut assumptions and just like what we should focus on versus now, because of like one client in particular I can think of, we went from Excel sheets all over the place with database and contacts and follow-up activities from a BD perspective. And now it's all in HubSpot. And we've been able to easily build out some reporting and sit down with the founders and say, hey, this is all the sales activity that we did this past year. And these are the channels that performed the best and drove the best amount of meetings and then ultimately revenue to the pipeline. And that is such a better conversation than have, okay, Now, this is now when we're thinking of 2026 and our strategy for this year, this is what we should focus on. These are the channels and the outbound activity that are producing the best results for us, right? So let's put more money and more time and effort into this versus in the past, we had none of that data to back up and build our strategy. It was just like the founders think we should go after this market or do this or do that. And then we just went and did it and hoped that it worked, right? Now to have the data. So once to answer your question, once you start to see that and the power of that, then I think adoption becomes very easy. But it's a long uphill battle to get to that point because when people are used to not having to track everything that they do to then now having to track it, if you're not tracking it in the CRM, then it's the CRM's just going to be a technology that you're paying for on a monthly basis, right? You have to start tracking in and putting in the information properly so that you can then start to see the benefits like I just explained.
Absolutely, Matt. Cannot agree more. Think pace a bit. You mentioned your personal goals, including completing a triathlon and learning the guitar, using different sides of your brain. What is the biggest challenge or opportunity that you're focused on for the next 6 to 12 months?
Personal or professional?
Personal first, professional
Okay.
after.
So personal, I think to me, so I have two young boys at home, I think, and a wife. And to me, it's just being you know, a good father, a good husband. I think that's always top of my list. I think too, and I am a good father and husband because of some of the other personal things like training for a triathlon, just being fit and just, having that health level and keeping that consistent. I find that if I don't go do something active in the morning before a day of meetings and work, then I'm not gonna perform as well, right? So that obviously that has a cascading effect not only to my family, but then the clients and the people I work with every day. So that to me is a big personal kind of goal. I also am in the process. I don't think I mentioned this to you before, but in the process of writing a book. So it'll be my first book and kind of coming off of the from hustle to engine, what you just mentioned before, and kind of my approach building a book around that. So for founders, written by really founders talking through how you can turn your business from hustle to engine. So that I'm excited about. That's something that I try to squeeze in between everything else. So I guess that's kind of is a little bit professional, but also personal as well. And then I think professionally, it's just really growing and scaling the business. And ultimately, now that I have other fractional CROs that are on the bench, is helping them grow and scale their businesses as well, right? So to me, it's just not me anymore, which is exciting and fun, but ultimately is getting the business to that next level. So I've grown pretty strong in the first couple of years when I was just kind of doing this on the side and stuff like that. Like I said, now that this is my first full year fully dedicated to the business, really I want to bring it to that next level. So
Congratulations, Matt. That's not easy. Most people drop off
yeah,
well before that. Looking ahead, where do you see fractional CRO heading in the next 3 years?
in the next 3 years, it's a good question. So I would love to be at a point where I have, to my point earlier, I don't want to have hundreds and hundreds of fractional CROs. I think if I could have a solid 8 to 10 CROs on the bench working under fractional CRO, I think if I can get to a point where I I just have a couple clients that I really enjoy working with, and I have a smaller kind of portfolio of clients. I think that would be great. And then, really, how do I grow and expand the business? I think the fractional space in general is growing, and you see fractional different types of execs all over. So, what is that next step after fractional CROs in a really good spot? To me, that could be take a lot of different channels, but to be able to be in a really good spot with the company, with my own work that I'm doing for clients to be able to then figure out and think through what that next step is after 3 years of fractional CRO. That's where I see it. And obviously that is at a bigger growing kind of company, more revenue coming to fractional CRO, more revenue coming to the CROs on the bench and working with, hopefully at that point, hundreds and hundreds of clients that we've been able to positively impact.
That is amazing, and I wish you the best on that. We've talked about the end goal, we've talked about 3 years. What are your top 2 or 3 strategic goals for fractional CRO over the next 6 to 12 months? And how do you envision achieving those goals?
Yeah. So I think over the next 6 to 12 months, I think one of my biggest things is really I want to work through this kind of thought leadership and really positioning piece. So like to my point earlier with the book, I'm in the process of working through how like a Substack could really fit into my overall go to market strategy, and moving individuals and contacts really through a very clear funnel myself. So it's funny, I build this and I train this with teams all the time, but to build it for yourself is different, right? When when you're having to build it for your own company, but to really get to a point, really in the next 6 months or less, that I have that very clear kind of offering to market. I think around that time, in 6 months, is also, and I've talked about it with some of the CROs on the benches, is to get to a point where maybe there's some off the shelf offerings. So, it might be, hey, we run a half day go to market workshop, builds out that framework that I was talking about before. I think that could be a really nice entry point, and maybe something that some founders, that's all they need is that. But then moving from there on, kind of how do you start to just build that foundation? So I think that could be an off the shelf. Then maybe some of the eyes stuff that we do. So like building sales playbooks, processes, all that kind of stuff, that could be another off the shelf. And then moving people. So like almost a maturity growth scale of prospects coming in, is that they don't necessarily have to go and bring on a fractional CRO right away on a monthly retainer. And that, sometimes is a little bit scary for founders, or they're just unsure. So maybe there's some entry points that are a little bit easier, at a set price, half day workshop, build this out, see the value from that, a full day, of work to operationalize some of your sales process and your go to market motions. And like those could be really nice entries. So I think that I see in the 6 month part. In 1 year, I mean, I want to be at a point where I've doubled revenue from last year. That's like an ultimate goal of mine. And in that, I think it's growing, bringing on other really, really smart and intelligent fractional CROs underneath me, and then helping them, grow their books of business. That's the ultimate goal in the 12-month period.
I love that goal. That is amazing. I've got one last question for you.
Yeah,
What's something that you talk about that we haven't talked about yet?
that I talk about a lot that we haven't talked
That
about. Is
we,
that the question? Yeah.
yeah,
I think, I mean, one of the things that I talk about, and I've talked about a lot recently, is that we kind of talked about it, maybe diving into it a little bit more, is around the sea of sameness. And I think this is something that is a big concept that I've seen firsthand in organizations that I've worked with. I see founders and people in general just tend to want to be comfortable and be in this spot where they just kind of talk and act like everybody else. And so there's this concept of like a challenger brand, and going out there and kind of challenging the norm. And I think the more, especially in the B2B space, the more that B2B companies can get comfortable by not acting and sounding and feeling the same as everybody else, I think there's huge upside potential. And I don't think it goes into, you don't have to do all these marketing tactics. You don't have to do all this stuff. It's just really nailing down that messaging can go a long way. I think that's really one thing, Rumen. And I think the other thing is, this is just my mindset and my thought, but I see it all the time with founders, is that a lot of success can be realized by just simplifying what you're already doing. So a lot of founders want to do everything under the sun when it comes to marketing and sales, right? They see this new product, they see this new technology, they do this, they do that. But what tends to happen is that you have all these kind of bits and pieces and they're not connected. So really stripping that back and simplifying, like, what is your core offering to the market? How are customers coming in to understand who you are and ultimately buy your product or service, and simplifying that and then adding on from there, right? So sometimes that simplification to like the core of who you are and what you do and how people find you, and then starting to add on from there, is super beneficial. And I think that's something that's overlooked sometimes because everybody wants like the next shiny object. And sometimes that could actually do a lot more harm than good for especially small and medium sized businesses.
absolutely. I could not agree with you more. But Matt, thank you so much for your time today. It was incredibly insightful to learn about the hustle to engine framework, the critical importance of revenue alignment, and the operational challenges of scaling a fractional bench. I can't wait to see the heights that fractional CRO reaches next year, and would love to catch up sometime in the future and discuss more. I have no doubt in my mind that you will easily double your revenue for fractional CRO within the next 12 months.
Yeah, I hope
Congratulations.
so. Yeah.
Wish you all the
Thank you. And I appreciate you having me on.
anytime.